Hi, let's make some Zuppa Toscana, low carb style. There's a soup at the Olive Garden called Zuppa Toscana. I think that's what it's called. It has potatoes and sausage, and it's in a heavy cream sauce. The heavy cream sauce and sausage is perfect for a ketogenic diet, but the potatoes not so much. So I've made up my own version that my family really enjoys. So even though it's summer, my daughter actually asked me to make it this week. So I thought I'd show you how I make a big pot of soup. What I've done is I've browned 2 pounds of sausage, and this is just a sausage that's low carb. You could use just ground pork and your own seasonings, but I used 2 pounds of sausage, and I've added an onion to this. And I used to add an entire onion. I've only used about a third to a half of an onion because onions do have a lot of carbs. So into that, and I haven't added anything else, just the onion, and I've let it all kind of cook down. The onion's translucent and the sausage is well browned. I'm going to add the equivalent of 1 clove of garlic. Now this is chopped minced garlic, and it's a teaspoon, but it's the equivalent of 1 clove of garlic. And since all that's all brown, nicely browned, I'm going to add some chopped zucchini. This is 2 kind of small to medium sized zucchinis. And the zucchini takes the place of the potatoes in this recipe. So I've tried to cube them because really a part of it is texture. And I'm going to add the zucchini in there. Okay, so now that the zucchini is there, and this is a sausage kale soup. Now the zucchini's in there, I'm just going to toss it around a little bit. I want to cook it down. I really like to get it a little browned in the fat. I haven't drained the sausage at all, nor will I, and I haven't added any fat, although sometimes I do. But anyway, so I'll mix it all through, and then ideally I would add 2 cups of homemade bone broth. Now I checked my freezers and I think I'm out of bone broth, which is a problem. I'll have to make bone broth soon. So because I'm out of broth, I'm going to use beef bouillon, and that's not ideal. And yes, I know there are some ingredients in the bouillon that are undesirable, but that's what I have to use because I don't have the homemade bone broth. So I'm basically using a Knorr's bone broth, beef bouillon. I put in 1 cube. I'm going to add a 2nd cube if I can get it open. And after I add I'm just going to tear it. After I add the bone broth, I'm going to add 2 cups of water. So, excuse me, not bone broth. After I add the bouillon cubes, I wish I was adding bone broth. I'll add this in, and beef broth will do, chicken broth will do, but I prefer something heartier like the beef broth. So 2 beef bouillon cubes and 2 cups of water. Now I'm going to let that simmer. And it won't simmer for long, maybe 10 minutes. What you want to do as it simmers, you want to make sure if you're using a bouillon cube like I did, make sure that it melts or make sure it dissolves. So what you want to do, the goal of this is to cook it down enough so that the zucchini becomes tender. You don't want it mushy, just tender. And it's going to cook, like I said, for maybe 15 to 20 minutes. So I'll pause the video, and when we come back, we'll add in our kale. Okay, so we've been simmering for a while. Our zucchini has been simmering, and it's that wonderful bright color now with the peeling. And I did not, when I chopped the zucchini, I did not peel it. Most of the nutrients are often in the skin, so I just left that, and it's fine. It's getting tender, and it's about time to add the kale. You may have to add more water to yours. It depends on, honestly, what kind of pot you are using and that kind of thing. I'm going to add, before I add the zucchini, I'm going to add a ½ teaspoon of salt. And somebody asked me about pink Himalayan sea salt. I really do prefer sea salt. Himalayan sea salt, Celtic sea salt, I prefer those. But the one I use, the grinder, is empty, and I've got to get a grinder. And so I have the big salt granules, but they're still in the big crystals, and I haven't ground any, so I need to do that. But anyway, so what I have, and let me kind of recap for you. We had 2 pounds of sausage, about a ½ of an onion chopped. We browned all of that together, didn't drain the fat. added 2 bouillon cubes, or you want to add 2 cups of bone broth. Because I didn't have bone broth, I used 2 bouillon cubes and 2 cups of water. I added 2 small to medium-sized zucchini that were chopped, probably about 2 cups of zucchini. That takes the place of the potato. And now I'm going to add kale. And the kale is just roughly chopped. If you haven't worked with kale before, I'm not a huge fan of kale. I'll just be completely honest. I really don't care that much for the taste, but it's really good in this recipe. It's very hearty. And if you haven't used kale, let me give you a few tips when you're working with it. The ends are usually tender, and then the stalk gets really thick fast. So if you just start at the bottom and pull it off, you can chop the ends. I usually get a knife and chop the ends, but then just go down the stalk. And it's super, super easy to do this. And you want it in kind of bite-sized pieces. It will cook down, as you'll see in just a minute. The kale does have some water, so you may want to add some, may want to not add extra water until you put the kale into it. And that's it. All right, so let's give this a stir. And I've used a good 3 cups of kale. You can start with 2 cups, see if you want to add more with the consistency. If you don't want to use kale, you could use spinach if that's something that your family's more comfortable using. And this is just going to cook down a bit. Now this is a really thick, hearty soup, and you can add more water to thin it down if you'd like. Once we get the kale cooked down and everything's tender, we're going to add heavy cream to this. I'm also going to add a little bit of thyme. You don't have to add it, just makes it that much savory and hearty. You can add fresh thyme if you have it. I do not have it. At one time, I kept a garden with fresh herbs, and that was before kids and before grad school and all that fun stuff. And now I tend to use dried herbs, or I buy my herbs if I need fresh. And I'm just going to use 1/4 teaspoon of dried thyme. If you're using fresh, just adjust accordingly. And the thyme just gives it a nice rich flavor. Okay, so all we've added is garlic and thyme as far as seasonings, and obviously there's some seasonings in the spinach. I wish you could smell it. I always say that, but I really wish we had smell-o-vision. And this, like I said, I'm making this in the summertime, but it is a fantastic fall recipe. It's hearty, and soup is just one of those things that it's wonderful even warmed up. So I tend to do a lot of my cooking on Sundays and then warm things up for my family later in the week. And that's cooking down nicely. I think it needs a little more water, even though I am going to add a cup of heavy cream. And I don't think it needs more kale. I think probably the 3 or 4 cups I used was sufficient, and I still have more kale for other things. I will put this one in just because this is a little guy, and I'm sure it's going to be nice and tender. I'm going to turn it down a bit. That's why you want to simmer while everything's getting done, and then you want to turn it down before you add your cream. So I'm going to put a little bit more water, maybe just a 1/2 cup or so, and use your judgment on that. That's about another 1/2 cup. And that's going to take the temperature down a little bit, and I'm going to turn it down a little bit. And then I'm going to add in a cup of heavy cream. Remember, heavy cream versus heavy whipping cream, if you can find it. Heavy whipping cream does a little bit lower fat profile. You can add butter if you're concerned about it not having enough fat, but it should be fine. And if you want it thinner, add more water. If you want it a little thicker, add more heavy cream. I haven't used thickeners with this before. I haven't needed to. Some people like to use arrowroot flour or xanthan gum as a thickener. I don't think this needs it. It really is delicious. And I'll let that simmer now for probably 15 to 20 minutes. Another thing that I like to do is add in some grated Parmesan cheese. Now, this is wonderful. I buy this at Trader Joe's. This was full. My daughter got into it, and so when I went to make this recipe, it was nearly empty. So I took my Parmesan cheese that I had bought and simply grated it. And the cheese, the Parmesan cheese, acts as a wonderful kind of natural thickener, adding it in. I also, right before I serve it, will often put some grated parm on top of the bowl. So I've got it put in a bowl all ready to eat. I'll add my grated Parmesan and sprinkle some bacon on top. And that just makes it that much more decadent and yummy. So let's add a little bit, and I promise to start measuring. So I'll measure. I'm going to start with just a 1/4 cup. Parmesan is one of those cheeses that are so rich in flavor, you really don't need a lot. And that wasn't quite a 1/4 cup. Of course, I also think Parmesan cheese is one of those things you can't have too much of either. And that's it. Now I'll turn it on low and let it simmer with the lid off, and maybe simmer for 15 to 20 minutes. And it's done. You can put some fresh cracked black pepper in it if you'd like. You could add some sun-dried tomato if you'd like. Anything that you think gives kind of a nice Italian flavor will make this wonderful. But this is super, super easy and delicious. I hope that you enjoy it.